Thank you.
I want to take a moment. The last 3 or so hours have gone so fast, and it was all wonderful. To just say thank you to Erin and Maureen and Kathy. I don't know if Kathy's still around. And everybody at North Bank for making me feel welcome and for helping me through the parts of this that were unfamiliar to me, and for what we now have to see, which is so wonderful. And and I wanted to also just acknowledge Erin because there are two pieces that we made together that are in the show. She's a friend and one of my favorite artists, and I was much slower at putting these pieces together than she was at getting me her pieces of them, and I still have some from years ago at home, promised to her, and she's been very patient and kind about that too. And anyway, I just wanted to say thank you. One of the things about the Poet Laureate position is that you have to kind of explain what a Poet Laureate is, and probably the simplest way to explain it is you're kind of an ambassador for poetry. And since I was kind of already doing that before I had the position, it wasn't that hard to do it once I had the position. It's just a matter of, it gives you the opportunity to meet new people, to go to other places that you might not have made it to just doing what you do normally. And the first poem I'm going to read is about that. And it ties in with the magic and power of words, because I kind of feel like poets hear a lot of negative messages all the time, and writers and painters and songwriters do too, about how you can't do the thing that you want to do, about how it's not really valuable. And so this poem is definitely about how I feel about that. And it's about one of the visits that we made to a library, which is one of the things the Poet Laureate does. This was the Ridgefield Library. And Deanie Grigard, who is part of the New Space Gallery here, was with me. And so I was kind of hoping she would be here for this. Anyway, I'll make sure she gets a copy of this. Schooled by the young poets of Ridgefield, Washington. Half a dozen prepubescent and adolescent boys, persuaded by their librarian to stick around after the Dungeons and Dragons program, listen patiently to the adults' poems about weather, life on the Gulf Coast, and holding on to one's mysticism. They devour a large tray of chocolate chip cookies and ask thoughtful questions. One wonders what I meant by destroying the capitalist nightmare from within. Listens carefully as I explain that in America, those whose work does not generate a steady income are considered less valuable people than others. Occasionally, one of them uses a tablet to look up unknown words. Finally, they can no longer contain themselves, leap from their seats to take over the podium, grab volumes of poetry by Basho and Sam Hamill displayed on a nearby folding table. The kids read the poems slowly, earnestly, and with great care. Some even recite poems from memory, showing the professors how it is done. Giggle and leap about like magical elves to remind us that poetry is a joy before it is a vocation. If you ever wonder what a Poet Laureate does, you go into schools and you go into libraries, and I am already kind of doing these things in the community, but every opportunity to look someone in the eye and say, just give it a try, It takes practice like anything else, just give it your best try, So, next I have a poem, the only poem of mine that's in the latest anthology, and this is a poem for horror movie fans and poetry fans, so I apologize to the people who are not horror movie fans who won't totally get it. And for the writers out there, have you ever had an image or an idea for a piece that's just kind of in your head, and you're kind of like letting it percolate, you're letting it roll around, but it takes a while for it to come out? I think I was writing this poem in my head for about 10 years before it actually came out like this. Loving poetry is like being a fan of horror movies, so enamored with the genre that you are willing to sit through movies that are completely moronic and not at all scary, in the hopes of catching that one unique concept, or cool character, or original way way of dispatching with someone. The basketball, which completely obliterates a person's head in that piece of shit deadly friend, or the fully grown adult male who claws his way out of the woman who has been raped by an alien, an extra. You stick with it to the end because you love it, fully realizing that they can't all be The Exorcist, The Omen, or Night of the Living Dead, can't all be Cronenberg, Argento, Luton, Whale, or Carpenter. Dig? So I got to do a really great project on the last National Poetry Month, April 2013. It was one of 85 poets who were asked to take one of the Pulitzer Prize-winning novels and create a poem a day during the month of April, and post each poem as you went. And I was embarrassed to find that there was one Pulitzer Prize-winning novel that I was sure that I had read, and that was Norman Mailer's The Executioner Song. This is a book about a killer. It's about the dynamics in male-female relationships, the power dynamics there. It's a really dark book, but I enjoyed it, and it gave me a lot of good material to work with. But one of the challenges of working with it was, how do you take something that's really dark if you want to say something that's slightly less dark than that? So I'm going to read the last poem, the kind of big conclusion from that, and you can tell me if you think it's interesting. And people who know me know that I work with found material quite a bit, so that part of it I was comfortable with already. But it is a challenge to take a 1,000-page novel and work with it in this way. So the last poem in the book for April 30th was called The Sound of the Word Could Change the Day. The violence of Portland licked right up to the edge of Vancouver, ruined it for the people living there. Writing poetry, a fast-developing synchronicity situation. Somewhat chaotic, the synchronicity of synapses, life on the brink of change. Grace and dignity in bed, become as one and come and come and come. Rant, rave, yell, scream. Permission to make a few inquiries, she would say to herself in the dark. Curiosity engulfed the man, a great big fucker, 300 pounds or so. It did hurt. Not averse to watching porn, always wanting something, ain't that something? Extra visits from Satan. Repercussions of the gloom that would not lift. Practicing magic, still a stigma. Life like a movie, paid attention. Slitted window inspired the mind to race. A certain lust for free will, all he ever talked about, must have been a sensitive child. I want freedom. I'll give you a piece of my story today, if you take care of me tomorrow. I cherish you. That's a true fact. Today you have kissed my eyes. You have blessed me forever. We are all sacrifices to the gods, attracted by impromptu coincidence, having spent more than 90% of our adult life in cages. Get into numerology. Numerology can keep you sensitive to patterns. Rebellious, stubborn physicists, poets, artists, physicians, musicians like Ginsberg, Kerouac, Hesse, Kesey, Watts, Crowley, Savio, and Rubin move into consciousness raising by toking, sensuous juxtaposition, not here to defend themselves. A message from the master gurus. I'm going to show you something I never showed you before. Piety swings. Disobey. Practice magic. Follow your conscience. Wear it and enjoy it. Transform your ability to guide the energies. Feel the vibration. Live in ultimates. Angel made her appearance. A striking beauty with an air of calm. An infectious, innocent-looking, melancholy wistfulness. Gentle, soft-spoken, courteous, and concerned. A kind of mystique about her, a sky glow. Awestruck, got off on talking to her. More style, class, sanity, and guts than anyone he'd ever met. She brought him peace. For lunch, they went to a topless bar, talked about survival. She got all of what he laid on her. It was all smooth then. No man ever loved a woman more than I love you. I love you with all that I am. A crevasse between them. The whole thing collapsed. Give me more time. It was one of those things in life he didn't know if he'd ever get over. It was so much fun, and I ended up calling it brutal glints of moonlight. I mean, glints of moonlight, like the poems in the book, is a phrase that Mailer wrote that I took. I'm sure he used the word brutal too, but I added brutal to it because his prose is kind of brutal. That's what Mailer does, is he kind of pummels you. So that was one of the fun things and the challenges here, was to try and massage that to say what I wanted to say about things. So just got two more for you. I was thinking about my friend David Madden, who's really like he's my most faithful correspondent. We live in a time when people don't really send letters to each other. And I send one letter to David, and David sends me back 5, where he sends me back a giant package filled with books and cassettes and different things. And so I feel very close to him. And if he could be here to read from To Be Named to you, he would. Since he can't, I'm going to read this poem from our first Ghost County anthology, and it's called How Poetry is Like the Mafia. For Chris, Ed, and Tony. Sometimes poetry reminds me of the mafia because it's like these little cliques or schools or movements, like mafia families. They can fight or they can try to get along, and who gets what turf and who's moving into somebody's turf where they don't belong. And the poets, like the mafia, may not like this, but the hierarchies are clear. And if the godfather or godmother of poetry doesn't like you, all he or she has to do is order some mid-lister to order some other poetaster to put a hit on you. Like the mafia, it's La Cosa Nostra. It's this little thing of ours, and how you can associate with some of the big famous poets, maybe even provide invaluable services, such as driving the concierge or being one of those hitmen for your own school. And yet, if you're Irish or Polish, or something, and not Sicilian, you can never be made. Never be made mafioso, or a made poet. And how, like the mafia, we poets can all sit down at some restaurant in Little Italy and break bread and joke and drink and kiss each other on the mouth, and the next day Big Eddie is found floating in the East River wearing concrete shoes. Ah, the hypocrisy of it. The mafia and us. Honor among thieves. Honor among poets. Don't make me laugh. Just as we find out Coppola was lying or wrong, and the mafia dealt hard drugs all the time, as well as underwriting the so-called victimless crimes like gambling, prostitution, black market, moonshining, etc. Nothing the mafia wouldn't do to make money, just as there's nothing a poet won't do to get a good poem out of it. Because just as the mafioso knows all he has to do is go to church and light a candle and pray and make confession to be forgiven, the poet knows, however egregious is crime in societal terms, name it. Name some heinous crime a poet or a mafioso has not perpetrated. The poet is celebrated just as long as the poems he wrote about his crimes are good. But Jesus, Mary, and Joseph help that same poet if he or she breaches some fundamental rule of family etiquette, i.e. uses too many cliches or figures of speech, is too prosy or writes for performance, or writes poems that don't meter or rhyme, or writes poems that do meter and rhyme. Because then that poet is just as likely as little Joey from the Bronx to end up shot to death in an abandoned Ford Fairlane on the outskirts of northwest Jersey for trying to skim too much off the top of the horses or the whores. In the mafia, the code of honor really comes down to one thing. Do whatever. Rape, steal, pillage, you just don't talk about it. The irony of it is that sooner or later, for one reason or another, it seems most of these mafia guys end up talking. And hell, some of them can make millions just by opening their gap and writing a book. Because there are people like me out there who for some reason think the mafia is cool and buy their books and give a shit. And that's the difference between the mafia and poets. David is holding things down in California. He understands that there's no money in poetry. Ed Coletti, who that poem is also dedicated to, has a blog called No Money in Poetry, and it's true. Magic taken seriously. This is me again. This is a Christopher Luna poem. This is from our first Ghost Town Poetry Anthology, and this is a poem that means a lot to me, and I think does have something to do with the magic and power of words to change people's lives. Magic taken seriously. And this is the last one I'm going to do. An invisible sigil passed on like a secret amulet from a school teacher to a lion caged, yet keeping one eye fixed on the door. Worry not, their time is swiftly drawing to a close. The crow's gate is trailed by a lingering nimbus, the after-image of a hypnagogic dream, deferred, let go, forgotten, like a mental grocery list left behind in a rusty old filing cabinet. There is a folder labeled wishes, filled to overflowing. Frayed bits of ideas fold out like withered petals. The rubber band that once held it all together, crusted, long since snapped, limp, collecting dust in an aluminum coffin. In need of a personal secretary or a French maid to dust out the static and the habit-forming poison of lies repeated often enough to begin to resemble truth. The collector paces in circles like monk before the piano, unable to put a single film in the can, or part with the spiral notebooks containing conjugated verbs from Mr. Samperi's 7th grade Italian class. Cave wall, picnic table, province of those who find it difficult to believe that any of us are here at all. How arrogant to presume that it is possible to leave anything behind. This anxiety returns us to the first and last question. If all is connected, what is the nature of the thread? If energy never dies, but is transformed, from where, or whom, or what does the transmission originate? Furthermore, if you knew the answer, would it change anything? Would your dream, be worth remembering? Would your cabinet be filled again? Would you be lucid enough to take control and begin anew? Thank you. Thanks again to the North Bank Gallery and everyone who read today. And please, if you enjoyed the show or any part of the show, invite your friends to come back through the month of August. And I may come and hang around a little bit during the month, just because I'm so curious to hear what people might have to say about it. So I'll try to drop in. Is there anything else that the gallery folks would like the folks to know? We're okay? All right, yeah, enjoy the rest of your evening. Enjoy One Kind Drumline, and if you have some time to do a little reading, you could do some light reading here in the room before you go.